Good afternoon. I'm Samantha from the law offices of Samantha Wolfe. We're located at 20 East 6th Street in Suite 206 in Waynesboro, PA. You can reach us at 717-655-2676. And I'm excited to be here today. Happy Veterans Day to everyone. And I wanted to just thank all those who have served. We really appreciate the sacrifice that both you, your families, your loved ones have made for us. That's what makes our country so great. So thank you for that. We wanted to take the time today to focus a seminar just on veterans benefits and those benefits that those that have sacrificed so much can receive. So that's what we're going to take the next 45 minutes to an hour to go over. So thank you all for being here. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so like I said, we're here to talk about veterans benefits today. So we're talking about this in the context of long-term care. So again, we have had a lot of presentations talking about long-term care and just the fact that people are living longer, and we've had some great medical advances. And so this does mean that we're having more people in assisted living and nursing home facilities. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is veterans benefits in the context of long-term care and how we can get some of those benefits to help pay for some of the veterans' long-term care costs. So the average cost of long-term care in Pennsylvania, every year they adjust this number. So for 2021, it is $11,044 per month long-term care costs are, which is about $132,000 a year. Now that's if we're talking about skilled level. So again, there are different levels of care when someone needs nursing home care. So we're talking about the skilled level care, and that would be the $11,044 a month. If you don't need, if it doesn't rise to skilled level, and skilled level would be if someone needs assistance with 2 out of the 5 daily activities of living. So if you need assistance with 2 out of 5, then you rise to the skilled level. If you are still able to do most things yourself and you're only at assisted living or maybe personal care level, then the cost of that is typically between 3 and 4,000 per month. Now, all of this does depend on where you are geographically. So, in this area where we are, we have some great facilities, and some of them are a little bit above the 11,000 for skilled level care, and some of them are a little bit less. So it all depends on where you're located and what the facility is that you're looking at. We also have in-home care options here in Pennsylvania. So you can find out about them at the Area Agency on Aging. So depending on what county, Franklin County here, it's in Chambersburg. If you're in Adams County, it would be in Gettysburg. So that would be a great resource to find out what in-home care options you have. But in Pennsylvania, you do have the LIFE program, we have skilled nursing agencies, and we have personal care agencies. And then this is just a little bit about the programs that the Area Agency on Aging, what they'll give information on. So Pennsylvania has an aging waiver program. So know that the aging waiver program would be if you need skilled level care. So if you need assistance with 2 out of the 5 daily activities of living, but you want to be able to stay in home, and so somebody's coming in the house to provide that care, and you can get up to so many hours per day through the Pennsylvania Aging Waiver Program. So the Aging Waiver Program is different than the typical in-home where you'd be there 24/7, or I'm sorry, the in-facility where you'd be there 24/7. Aging waivers where you're in your house, but somebody's coming in to provide that care. We also have Meals on Wheels in the community. We have a Pennsylvania Caregiver Support Program. So that we always encourage our family members. So right now, just the way the demographics work, a lot of times we're seeing that it might be a daughter who's providing care. We actually have a couple of cases where we do have a son who's also providing care. So it gives some support programs for them, just some assistance to help them manage all their responsibilities. We do have some home support options. We have personal care options. There are some transportation options here in Franklin County that you can get through the Area Agency on Aging program. And then we do have senior centers as well as different meal programs in addition to the Meals on Wheels. So I just wanted to make sure to go over all of that. Again, just giving you some background before we start building on the veterans benefits portion of it. So the Aging Waiver Program was established to provide in-home care versus nursing facility care. And I do think I always have to try to think through, people ask, what do I think Pennsylvania is going to look like in the long-term care area? And so I think that as we are making our way through the pandemic, I do think we're going to see a little bit more of a shift where we're going to see more emphasis on in-home care. keeping our loved ones at home and having somebody come in the home to provide care so that they're not in a facility. I know that we've had some families that have had to deal with the lockdowns and how to still be able to see and provide support for their loved ones. So I do think the Aging Waiver program, we may see more people enroll in that program. They do have to meet the financial and medical criteria for the program. So do know that this is still administered through the medical assistance program. So again, it's really Medicaid. You're qualifying for Medicaid. It's just that the care is being provided in your home versus going into a nursing facility. And it's funded through the Department of Public Welfare, which is, again, the Department of Human Services. They're always changing their name. I think technically now it's Department of Human Services. So it provides in-home care based on the applicant's needs. This can be between 50 and 80 hours per week. And then typically there's a personal emergency response system that is also provided, can provide meals, and they can provide incontinence supplies as well. Okay, so let's talk about how this fits in a little bit with veterans benefits. So in-home care can be paid for using veterans benefits. So I'm going to talk about the different types of benefits that veterans have, but the important thing to know is that we do have aid and attendance benefit. So this is for wartime veterans and their surviving spouses. So know that when we're dealing with husband and wife, even if the spouse who was a veteran or is a veteran has passed away, the surviving spouse can still get some benefit through the aid and attendance option here. So this is wartime veterans and their surviving spouses 65 years and older. They may be entitled to this benefit, and it's called aid and attendance, and it's provided through the Department of Veterans Affairs. And then, so this is designed to provide financial aid to help offset the cost of long-term care for those that would need assistance. So either that would be in-home, again, with the PDA waiver program. So veterans benefits could be used first to pay for that care. And then to the fact that veterans benefits don't cover it all, then there might be some Medicaid funds that are allocated to that in-home care option as well. So they would need assistance with the daily activities of living, which include bathing, dressing, eating, toileting, and transferring. American Veterans Aid, which is a private company, is dedicated to helping war era veterans and their surviving spouses receive those benefits. So there are all kinds of different organizations, entities, and programs that are always going to help veterans secure and be able to know what their benefits are. So our job here in our office is just to provide the legal support for that. So to give information about those programs, and to the extent that we're able to help clients qualify, whether it be for the financial or for the legal component of it. So that's how we kind of come alongside. So why do we need to talk about protecting against long-term care costs? So I know Jess is working on our slideshow. So I'm just going to talk about what assets are available and what our assets are exempt from long-term care costs. So certain assets are going to be exempt. So when we're talking about a husband and wife, and let's say husband goes into a nursing home, and wife is in the community. So what would happen here is that the community spouse, in this example, the wife's retirement is not available to pay for husband's care. In addition, there's going to be a vehicle, the vehicle of highest value is not going to be available to pay for care, as well as the primary residence. The primary residence is an exempt asset as well, so that would not be available to pay for care. So that just means that a nursing home cannot force the sale of a primary residence in order to pay for care. I'm just going to keep talking as we figure out the slideshow, so don't worry. I'm just going to keep cruising along. So we also, I think, Jesse, you need to go back some previous slides. So the other thing to know is that there is an amount, go forward one more. Yep, the maximum amount is $130,000. So again, we look for what assets are exempt. So the community spouse's retirement, the primary residence, and then we have the $130,000. So those funds cannot be used to pay for spouse's care that's in the nursing home. Everything else is going to be available to pay for care. So we're talking about how do we pay for this care. Veterans benefits can be really helpful to help preserve the community spouse's asset. So what is long-term care planning? So that's just the process of planning for your future should you ever need long-term care. And it's about protecting those assets. We don't want to hide them. It's all about what we're allowed to do legally under the law. And it's so that we can protect the parent, the spouse, and future generations. And I feel really passionately, especially about protecting the spouse. When you have a husband and wife and they're only allowed to keep that $130,000, depending on how long they live, it may leave them financially compromised. So we really need to make sure that we're providing the support financially that we need for those individuals. So how do we pay for them? And that's where we kind of sync up the long-term care costs with the veterans benefit. So the first way you can do it is out of pocket. Second way is if you have any long-term care insurance or other private medical insurance. So we used to see this a lot. Clients would come in and they'd have a long-term care policy and they would pay an annual premium. And as long as they paid the premium, they're getting that benefit. Downside of the long-term care insurance would be that the premium could increase drastically from year to year. We had one client who we saw a 17% increase from one year to the next. And so as long as they pay that premium, they have the long-term care insurance. But if for whatever reason they stop paying that, then they lose that and they're not going to get those funds back that they've already contributed to the insurance. So we have seen that on the investment side, some other products have come out like life insurance that have long-term care riders or other type of investment products that can be used to help pay for care. Not really what we want to focus today on, the insurance. We always leave that up to our great partners that we partner with our financial advisors in the community. So third way you can do it is through Medicare. So we have had a whole seminar on Medicare, and we actually have posted that on our YouTube channel. So to the extent that you want to go back and see something specific just in Medicare, I encourage you to check that out. You can find us if you go to YouTube by just putting in the law offices of Samantha Wolfe, and you can see all of our fun videos there. Medicaid, we've done a whole seminar or multiple on Medicaid and how that can be used to pay for long-term care. Today, what we want to focus on is our last bullet point, which is veterans benefits. And so this is something that we've seen in the last couple of years change a lot. When I first started practicing law, for example, there was no look back for veterans benefits. So if we had somebody come in and need long-term care and we were trying to protect assets and get a way to help pay for their care, we could do some transfers, we could use some trusts, and there was no look back period for veterans benefits. But in 2018, all of that changed and we saw the law change. And so now we do have a look back period. So we're going to get to all of that. So I think that's why it's so important that you partner with an attorney or a legal professional that really does understand the veterans benefits and how that can help. So how we're looking at it is when we're trying to figure out how to pay for care, veterans benefits can be really helpful for a couple of reasons. So the first is that depending on the benefit you're receiving, there are two main benefits under the Veterans Association that you can apply for. So depending on the type of benefit, it can either help contribute, so you're not paying as much out of pocket. So when we're talking about the spouse, for example, it's just more assets. It's going to take longer, allow, longer care to be offered before you run out of funds. So that's one way to look at it. The other way is that veterans benefits are really important if you do qualify for Medicaid, because the veterans benefits can cover the first part of it, and then anything remaining would be paid for by Medicaid. So it works not only to help with individuals who are paying out of pocket, but it also works in conjunction with Medicaid. So that's what we really wanted to talk about today. So we can't talk about that though until we at least do a crash course in some of these other things, just so everybody kind of understands. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what we can use to pay for care and what programs there are. So know that I'm going to go through these next couple of slides pretty quickly. It's just introducing the topic. Again, we have whole seminars, virtual seminars that we've devoted to these specific areas. So the first thing is Medicare. So I always like to make the distinction to know that Medicare is a federal health insurance program that insures individuals in the following categories. So age 65 or older, under 65 with certain disabilities, end-stage renal disease, and Lou Gehrig's disease. So primarily Medicare is health insurance, okay? How Medicare comes into dealing with long-term care payments is that Medicare can cover a certain length of time for certain skilled facilities, but there are certain criteria that you have to meet. So for example, let's just say I'm dealing with husband and wife, and let's use the example where husband is the veteran. And so he needs long-term care. So we're trying to figure out how are we going to pay for this care? So the first thing we have to decide is, do we get coverage under Medicare? So we kind of go through our framework of questions to see, what do we need to apply for veterans benefit wise? So Medicare covers up to 100 days, okay? But that's only after you've had a minimum of a 3-day hospital stay. And I need to make sure to reiterate this because sometimes if you go into the emergency room, you may not actually be admitted. You may be admitted for observation or have an observation status. And so what we do know in Pennsylvania, and this is being litigated currently, is that technically observation status does not trigger the 3-day hospital stay. So you may actually be in the hospital for 3 days, but actually only be in observation level status. And so Medicare is not going to cover the transition to a long-term care facility if you would need nursing home care. So if you qualify, if you're actually admitted into the hospital for at least 3 days, then Medicare covers up to 100 days. And what we've noticed is that for those individuals who either aren't aware of what veterans benefits there are out there or haven't taken the time to apply for any benefits yet, that 100 days is really crucial because that's when we apply for those veterans benefits. So without Medicare, we really have no room in there. You're going to start paying out of pocket. The Medicare is helpful because it gives us a buffer. That's not to say that you can't get veterans benefits to be retroactive, but again, you're trying to communicate with the facility and there's all kinds of issues there. So I always like to think of the Medicare 100 days, up to 100 days, as the buffer. And this is the period in which you want to make sure you have all of your benefits lined up for what you're going to need when you need the skilled facility. So day 1 through 20 with Medicare, there's no copay. Day 21 through 100, there is a copay in excess of the deductible, and in 2021, that's $185.50, so $185.50. Day 100 and beyond, there's no coverage under Medicare, because remember, Medicare is not designed to be long-term care. It's designed to be health insurance. So it's a short-term period in which, during those 100 days, Medicare can cover those skilled needs that you might have. It's not going to cover long-term care nursing home after the 100 days. It's not going to cover dental, vision, or hearing aids. So when we're going through our list, what's the next thing that we can rely on to help pay for care if either A, there aren't out of pocket, or even if we have a spouse and we're trying to protect assets? So the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, so remember, Medicare is the health insurance. Medicaid is still the federal program. Each state administers it a different way. So Pennsylvania administers it through the Department of Human Services, or DHS. And this is specifically targeted to long-term care needs. So Medicare is the health insurance component of it. Medicaid is the long-term care component of it. 2/3 of our nursing home residents are already receiving or will at some point, qualify for Medicaid benefits, because you qualify for Medicaid if you have the health requirements or if you meet the medical requirements and you meet the financial criteria. So eventually, if you're in a nursing home long enough, if you haven't done planning, you're probably going to eventually be on Medicaid because your funds will run out. Medicaid does cover nursing home care and the aging waiver program, but it's not going to cover personal care homes, assisted living programs, or most in-home care unless it's the aging waiver program. And then before we shift to totally focus on the veterans benefits, the other thing you need to know is that there's a 5-year look back period. So this is important to kind of transition us because Medicaid has had a 5-year look back period for quite a while. It used to be 3 years. I think they changed that in 2005. As long as I've been practicing law, it's been a 5-year look back period. I always get the question because people have heard, that it's 7 years. So the question is always, what is the look back period? Right now it is 5 years. Know that usually every term in the Pennsylvania legislature, somebody introduces something, either a separate bill or attached to another bill, that talks about increasing the 5 years to 7 years, but it has not actually been increased to 7 years. It is 5 years right now. The other question I get a lot as it deals with the look back period is, do they grandfather you in? So for example, when it switched from a 3-year to a 5-year look back period, anybody who had already started their look back period got the one, if you started when it was 3, they got that 3-year look back period. If you were in the middle of that, they grandfathered you in. So we would assume, and again, we know that we shouldn't always assume, but the thought then is that if they grandfathered when they switched from 3 to 5, if they do ever increase it, maybe to 5 to 7 or any other look back number, that they would grandfather everybody who has started their 5-year period. So what is a look back period? So a look back period is a time frame in which Medicaid is going to say, we're not going to cover care because you've made some sort of transfer in that window of time. So the important thing to know is that the maximum look back period in Pennsylvania is 5 years. You can have a shorter look back period if you're not transferring as much assets or as many assets. So for example, if you're transferring $100,000, and this doesn't count if you're transferring it to a spouse. So no, this would be if you're transferring it to a child or to a trust or someone other than a spouse, because transfers between spouses are exempt, okay? Now, a lot of times transfers between spouses don't really help us because regardless of how it's titled, if it's above the 130,000 and isn't an exempt asset, it's going to be available. That being said, transfers between spouses are exempt. So anything though, any other transfer that you make to a trust or to anyone else that you didn't pay for. So for example, if I bought my parents' property and I'm paying money for it, the look back period doesn't apply because there was consideration that was involved in that. But if my parents would gift that, meaning I didn't pay for it, if they would gift that, then you take the value of what the transfer was. So for example, if the transfer was $200,000, you take $200,000 and you divide that by the $11,099. Remember that number, we call that our penalty advisor. That penalty advisor increases every year. So in 2020, it was one number, and in 2021, it's now the $11,099. So whatever the penalty period is in that year, you take the $200,000 or whatever amount you're transferring and you divide it by the penalty advisor that was in effect on the day you made the transfer. So for example, I have my calculator right here. So if you take the 200,000, just for example, let's take 200,000, and I'm going to divide it by $11,099. That gives us 18. Okay, so what that means is that's an 18-month period in which Medicaid won't cover my parents' care because they gifted 200,000 to me. So 18, we divide that by 12, that doesn't actually only a look back period of a year and a half. So when we're talking about look back periods, we always think of it in the context of a 5-year look back period, but know that if you aren't transferring as much money, then there may be a lesser look back period. Now, that being said, any amount over $500 in 1 month is going to trigger or create a transfer penalty. And then again, you're ineligible for every 1 month for every $11,099 that you transferred. So I wanted to make sure to mention that because we're going to talk about a look back period for veterans benefits here in a second. So let's go ahead and progress. Okay. I like it, just so everyone on the call is, I am not the only one who can't deal with technology. So my sister Jess is sitting in here advancing slides and it's saying that we don't have internet connections. Is it moving, Jess? Okay. No, I still have the 5-year look back period going on. And if not, I'll attempt to share my screen. Is it working? Mm-mm. Okay, hang on just 1 second. We planned for this because I know how it is when I'm doing slideshows. As most of you, because you've already been on, have experienced when being on here, I always seem to mess it up somehow, but we're just going to roll with it. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen. All right. Yay. All right, so let's keep going on. So how do we pay for the long-term care? So, and Jess, we're good. You can see that, right, on the screen? Okay. So how do we pay for long-term care? So we have out-of-pocket, we have the long-term care insurance, we have Medicare, we have Medicaid, and then the veterans benefit. So that being said, let's get into our veterans benefits portion of it. So know that there are 2 main benefits that people can obtain through the Veterans Administration. So the first is a service-connected pension. The second is the veterans pension. Pensions are awarded for a non-service connected disability. So, and I'm going to do the last bullet point and then I'm going to explain both of these. So a veteran or a spouse cannot get compensation and a pension, okay? So number 1, the service connected compensation. What that means is we're going to get to some slides that actually show you some time frames coming up here. But the service connected compensation is saying that if you served at least 1 day of active duty during a certain period of time, and you've been diagnosed with a certain medical condition, Parkinson's is a great example. So if you had at least 1 day of active duty during a time frame that the Veterans Administration has designated, and you are then diagnosed with Parkinson's, or they have a whole list of them, then you're considered, it's a presumption that you got, or as a result of your service, you have this diagnosis. So because of that, the Veterans Administration is going to give you a service-connected compensation. It's almost like if you were injured on the job and you're getting payment for that injury. Okay, so I like that the Veterans Administration does this. So again, if you're going to be sacrificing something and later on in life you have now been diagnosed with something that they can link to your service, then the Veterans Administration is going to say, okay, we're going to give you a certain compensation package for that. Okay, so that's one type of benefit that you can get. Know that that is not asset-based. The Veterans Administration doesn't care what your income, what your asset level is. They don't care about any of that because it's all based on the fact that you served 1 day of active duty during this particular time frame and you had this diagnosis. Okay, so the second benefit that you can get through the Veterans Administration is their pension. So their pension is different. So this is based on your asset and income levels that you have, in addition to what level of care you need. Okay, so again, the service-connected compensation, that's not based on asset income. That's not based on what your, if you need help, for example, with 2 out of the 5 daily activities of living, none of that. It's you've been diagnosed with this and you served at this location during these periods at some point, so we're going to give you funds for that. So the pension is the one that's based on asset income and what your medical needs are. Okay, so fingers crossed that I was able to advance. Okay, so if you are applying for the service-connected compensation, there are a couple of requirements. You have to have the discharge separation papers. You need to have that. You need to have the service treatment records, and you need to have medical evidence of the disability. Usually you do that by getting a physician to sign off that you have this disability. So you have to have those 3 things. So again, this is the one that you served during a certain period of time. You now have a medical diagnosis. We don't care what your asset, income, we don't care if you need help yet with any daily activities living. This is just solely based on the time you served, where you served, and now your medical diagnosis. So this is what we call the presumptive disability benefit. So if diagnosed with a chronic disease, this is another component that you have, within 1 year of active duty release, then you can apply for disability compensation. So when we're kind of looking at the umbrellas, this is all service connected. Okay, so we have the one that says you may have served during the Korean War, but you now have Parkinson's, so you're going to get the service connected disability. This presumptive disability benefit is you've been diagnosed with a chronic disease within 1 year of active duty. So the example to that would be diabetes, hypertension, arthritis. So then you're going to get a disability compensation package for that as well. And it's based on when the individual served and the diagnosis. So the example would be Parkinson's in Vietnam. So let's go in here. So service connected, we just went through that. Now let's talk about the pension requirement. So remember, the pension requirement is a little bit different because it does have an income and asset component to it that we have to make sure that you're qualified for. So number 1, you have to be discharged from service after at least 90 days of active duty service with at least 1 day during the eligible wartime period. So there's 90 days of active service duty, but you have to have had at least one of those 90 days, or longer, but at least one in the 90 that was considered during the eligible wartime period. Which most people, we've noticed that if they have served during any of the past conflicts that we've had, as well as the Gulf War, a lot of times you automatically fit in because the wartime eligible period does cover most of that time frame. The annual income has to be below the threshold. You have to be 65 or older, or be totally and permanently disabled, or be a patient in a facility receiving skilled nursing home care or receiving SSI. So that third part, there are 3 requirements. That third part is an or, meaning 65 or older, So if you're 67, then you meet that third criteria. Or be totally and permanently disabled. You could be younger than 65 for that one, or be a patient in a facility receiving skilled nursing care. So again, doesn't mean you have to be over 65, or receiving SSI. So if you meet any of those four there, then you meet the last prong of the pension component. These are the official dates for periods of war. Now, the one thing I did want to note on here is that you're going to see the Persian Gulf War. That started August 2nd, 1990, according to this. So again, this is what the Veterans Administration is saying. So we're talking about active duty. You have to have served at least one day during these dates. Okay, so let's say I have a client who was considered active duty for 180 days. So we've met our minimum of 90 days, and they served at least one day during the period of June 27th, 1950 to January 31st, 1955, and that was considered active duty. I just need one day in that time frame. Then if they have any of those illnesses or medical conditions that have been linked to that, then they get that service-connected compensation. Notice that the Persian Gulf War, it's a date not yet determined. So that's going to be the longest period. And we are having clients who are now falling within that. It used to be that we were dealing primarily with World War II, Korean, and Vietnam, but now we're seeing some Persian Gulf War veterans that we're applying for benefits for. So that is a much longer time frame. Okay, so remember, service connected would be you've served at least one day of active duty and a total of 90 days of of service, and you have a diagnosis. That's the service connected. Then we have the pension part of that. So the pension part of that is what falls under this too. So this is on October 18th, 2018, the Veterans Administration issued sweeping changes that related to non-service connected disability pensions. So this is the basic veterans pension, the survivor's pension, so for a spouse, the aid and attendance pension, and a household pension. So pretty much anything that's not connected to the diagnosis. So if it's dealing with we're talking about assets and income, trying to figure out if you qualify, then most likely these new changes that were enacted in 2018 are going to apply. So what they did is they enacted a 36-month, which is the 3-year look-back period, and that begins the date of the VA pension application dating back 3 years. So it's not the 5-year look-back period that we saw for Medicaid, but it is the 3-year look-back period. Look at the next prong, though. It does say if an individual violates the look-back rule, period of VA pension ineligibility will be the penalty up to 5 years. So it's interesting. The look-back period is the period in which they can go back and look at the transfers, but the ineligibility period could be up to 5 years. Okay, so it's a little bit different than Medicaid because Medicaid has a 5-year window that we can look back on, and 5 years is the maximum look back period that we get. So the 5 years fits for both of them. That's not the case for the veterans benefits. Veterans benefits, you look back in the 3-year window. So the look back period tells us what the window of time to look back in. But again, you can have an ineligibility period, I'm having trouble saying that, up to 5 years, okay? So if you transfer assets for less than fair market value. So if, again, I would be buying something, or if we have the children of our clients and they're buying real estate, that's the best example I can give you, and it is for what's considered fair market value, then we aren't looking at a look-back period. And it does have the net worth eligibility limit of $130,000. So that matches pretty closely with that $130,000 that you're allowed to keep as a community spouse for Medicaid purposes. So we see some similarities with the veterans benefits as we do with the Medicaid. Not everything, not across the board, but we do see some numbers that are the same or close. And that's as of November 30th, 2021. So income is considered for net worth. So an individual's monthly income applied by 12 is then added to the net worth. That's a little bit different than what we see for Medicaid. So Medicaid, the income just kind of tells us what assets the individual who's in the facility is allowed to keep. So if they have a monthly income less than a certain amount, they can keep $8,000 worth of assets, the person who's in the facility. If they have income over a certain amount, then they're only allowed to keep $2,400 worth of assets. So the income from Medicaid determines the asset value that you're allowed to keep for the person who's going into the facility. For veterans benefits, income is considered as part of your net worth. You take the monthly income multiplied by 12, and you have to add that to the net worth. So that's a little bit different than we see with the Medicaid rules. The penalty divisor is 2,266. So you divide the amount in excess of the 130,000 by the 2,266 to determine the total penalty period. So there's a lot of math when you're dealing with these type of programs and trying to figure out if you do qualify. And usually when we're applying for veterans benefits or if we're applying for Medicaid benefits, we do have a huge binder because they're going to require, if there's a 3-year look back period for veterans benefits or a 5-year look back period for Medicaid, they're going to require, statements that show what's been happening during that look back period. So it is pretty time intensive when you're trying to put together an application for these benefits. And that's why when we're talking about paying for long-term care, that's why things like Medicare are so important, because it gives you 100 days to kind of get all of those things together to the extent that you haven't applied yet. And if we're applying for the pension component of it, most likely you haven't applied for that benefit, because remember, that is asset-based as well as medical-based. So you may not have applied for those benefits yet. Oh, yes. Sorry, I'm pointing to my sister to have her advance the slides, and I'm advancing. Okay. Thank you guys for putting up with all of these fun technology things that I seem to have a challenge with every time. Okay, so assets. What assets are included in the fair market value of all of your stuff? So all of your real property, all of your personal property, that does minus the amount of any mortgages that you may have. So you are allowed to deduct that from the value of any real estate. Real property does mean any land and buildings you may own. Your personal property assets include any of the following. So investments, you might have stocks or bonds in an investment account. You might have furniture. You might have some boats. All of that's going to count in as the personal property. Okay. Assets that you don't include when you're trying to figure out what your net worth is, your primary residence. So this is the home where you live most or all of the time. So if we have individuals that have multiple places that they live, if they winter in Florida, for example, it would be where you live most of the time. That would be considered your primary residence. So that's usually where you start seeing the 6 month and a day. Where do you live most of the time? That would be your primary residence. Your car, and basic home items like appliances that you wouldn't take with you if you moved to a new house, okay? So we're gonna see some similarities there with the Medicaid rules as well, because remember your primary residence is also exempt from Medicaid. It's exempt against long-term care costs, when we're trying to apply for Medicaid, and your car is also exempt. So you see some similarities there. Annual income. So annual income is the money that you earn in a year for a job or from retirement or annuity payments. It includes any of these. So salary or hourly pay, any bonuses that you might be getting, any commissions, any overtimes, any tips that you might have. Interestingly, I don't see this as much here, but when I used to practice in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, they have the Marcellus shale stuff happening. And so we had clients that were getting royalties. And bonus payments for gas leases. And so at the time when I was working up there, the new rules hadn't come in and we didn't have any look back period that we had to worry about. We could just transfer everything and immediately qualify. So all of those things are now going to be counted when we're talking about the annual income. And interestingly, the veterans benefits prior to 2018, they really didn't give us a clear definition of what assets and income a client was supposed to have. I mean, we kind of knew based on what we had seen them permit in the past, but it wasn't until 2018 that they came out and said, we're dealing with the 130,000, very similar to the Medicaid numbers. Now we can subtract certain expenses from the annual income when we're trying to figure out the worth. And so that would be educational expenses and medical expenses that you're not reimbursed for. What other type of benefits are available to veterans? So, of course, we've talked at length today about long-term care benefits. We've talked about the disability pension. We've talked about pension programs. The other thing to know is that typically, if you go to a medical facility or like a VA hospital, you can typically get free or low-cost medical care. So a lot of it depends, again, on where you're going to be receiving this care. So if you happen to be located close to a facility, a VA facility, then you can get free or low cost medical care there. You're also going to find things like education assistance, post traumatic stress disorder support, life insurance, retirement benefits. I see it says just retire, but retirement benefits, vocational rehabilitation, and some death benefits that you can get there. So I know we really hit the first three in today's presentation, but know that there are some other benefits. And the nice thing is that the Veterans Administration does do a great job. They have a great website that's easy to navigate. So I always encourage clients to go check that out just to make sure that there aren't any benefits that they're missing that they could be getting. All right, then we want to have a slide in here that's talking about the different wartime periods and some of the illnesses that we have seen that come under those service-connected disability compensation options there. So during World War II, we saw a lot of nuclear weapons testing, any activities related to that. Of course, there's some radiation risk. So we're surviving spouses, dependent children, and dependent parents of veterans who die as a result of diseases that related to radiation exposure. They could be eligible for survivors' benefits. For the Korean War, exposed to cold related to disease or injury, so that's skin cancer and frostbite scars, arthritis, fallen arches, stiff toes, and cold sensitive. I'm not going to be able to say this. Sensitization. Cold, you're just sensitive to the cold. I'm sorry, I can't get that word out. These conditions may worsen as the veteran grows older and could develop diabetes and then the peripheral vascular disease, which may place them at a higher risk for amputations. I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at this. I'm laughing at my inability to pronounce I still can't say it. We're going to move on. But just know that if you had exposure to any of these things, then you may have the ability to receive some funds from that. During the Vietnam War, if you were exposed to Agent Orange, so benefits for children or of the veterans exposed to Agent Orange who may have birth defects, including spina bifida and other certain birth defects, may be entitled to VA benefits. For the Persian Gulf War veterans that we have, so medically unexplained illnesses. So that would be if you have a diagnosis of a Gulf War syndrome, so certain infectious diseases, and then I'm not even going to attempt to say this, I apologize, the lateral sclerosis, ALS. So if you've been diagnosed with that, who've had 90 days more of continuous active military service. So I wanted to put a special slide in here because we do have a lot of our clients who are suffering from these medical disorders. And so knowing that you can get benefits because of that, I wanted to make sure we had a slide devoted to that. So we took a slide dealing with eligibility and whether or not you would be eligible based on if you have dependents and what your income is. So I know that this is a little bit confusing, but what you have to know is that along the left side would be dependent on what the veteran's home life situation is like. So sometimes you have just a veteran and you're trying to get them to qualify for benefits. They might have 1 dependent, 2 dependents, 3 dependents, 4 dependents, and then for any additional dependent after that. So that's along the left side. Atop the right column going across, you're going to see the different threshold amounts and what it qualifies for. So for example, we see a lot of individuals who can qualify for the VA pension with aid and attendance threshold. So that's the 1, 2, 3, 4th one over. And so you would take your finger down and say, how many dependents are we dealing with? Do we have any? And then what your income thresholds are. So that's where this is helpful. Notice that the VA pension, which is right next to the aid and attendance, you have to have the income threshold is a lot less. So know that the VA pension with aid and attendance, that's where we're talking about where you might need assistance with 2 out of the 5 daily activities of living. That's what the aid and attendance component is. The VA pension is just if you have income that's that low, then you get a pension amount as a veteran. So I wanted to make sure to point that out. So this chart is very helpful. It is updated every year. So this is the 2020 chart that we have. All right, so the next question I have for veterans, clients that we have is, can you just add your children's names to the assets? So when we're dealing with that, I always like to caution and bring up concerns that we might have. So we have the 4 Ds that we're worried about: divorce, debt, disability, and death. So it still creates that ineligibility period for veterans benefits, for Medicaid benefits. And so you have to make sure that this really is in the best interest. We typically don't recommend adding a child's name or transferring it to the children, because then it is subject to all of the children's creditors. If the child would predecease you in Pennsylvania, it's going to be subject to any inheritance tax to come back to you. So we typically recommend using trusts here at our office. We like to use trusts. We're comfortable with using those and funding assets into the trust so that we can make sure that if we wanted to qualify for Medicaid or for veterans benefits, and we move those assets into the trust and you make it through the look back period, then those assets are not available to pay for care. So how do you do that? We talked a little bit about the different investment products with a long-term care insurance, or you might have life insurance with a long-term care rider. You might have different investment products that can be allowed, allow the payout for certain long-term care. Thing we want to focus on is the irrevocable trust. So why do you have an asset protection plan? When we had the slide earlier about how do you pay for long-term care, remember we had the Medicare, we had the Medicaid, we had the veterans benefits. All those are really important. To the extent that those benefits still fall short of what the daily rate is for long-term care costs, then you may be paying out of pocket. And that's where you could end up leaving your spouse financially compromised. And at least in the context of dealing with veterans, if we have somebody who has served our country and has sacrificed so much personally, and the family has as well, I feel like it's important that we make sure that they're qualifying for all the benefits that they can be receiving. So that's why I think the asset protection planning is really important, to make sure that we're able to protect assets for that spouse if one spouse is going in for long-term care. So I think that's why it's so important. Under the law, you are allowed to do this type of planning. I know that sometimes people want to ask, is it hiding assets? Can we do this legally? And the answer to that is yes. Pennsylvania does allow you to do that. You just have to work within the look back period. So again, Medicaid, it's a 5-year look back period. For veterans, it's a 3-year look back period. So as long as you are doing transfers and you're complying with all of the laws, you can do an asset protection plan. And it's all about making sure that we're not having our client give up control. They're still in control. They can still, make decisions about those assets, but we're just creating a layer of protection so that those assets don't have to be used. The other question I get a lot is, can the assets be used? And the answer to that is absolutely. So if you have a client or a family member who, maybe isn't at skilled level care, or for whatever reason wants to use the funds and the assets to pay for care, then you can do that. Absolutely. But again, the benefit of doing this type of planning is, especially if you're a veteran, it does allow you to get those benefits that you are entitled to having served our country. All right, so some of this I already covered. It's not hiding assets. You are legally allowed to do this. It's using the existing law to just create barriers to prevent creditors from attaching to those assets. And I wanted to put up here this visual that kind of shows, and I know that we keep throwing up this visual every presentation that we have. So this is a visual that just shows some of the options with the trust. So every time that we're dealing with the trust, it's important to know that there are typically 3 main roles in a trust. There is the grantor, that's the person who creates the trust and then transfers assets into it. There is the trustee, that's the person who manages the assets, buys, sells, makes decisions related to that. And then we have the beneficiary, and the beneficiary is the person who can receive distributions out of the trust. So when we do these types of trusts, typically what we're doing is the client is still the trustee because they're the grantor. And the way we're able to do this is we take the power of distribution and we take it away from the trustee who normally has that power, and we give it to what we call a trust protector. Because we've bifurcated those 2 roles, then it does allow those assets to be protected as long as the assets have been owned in the trust for the look back period. So for Medicaid, it's 5 years. For veterans benefits, it's 3. There's a 3-year look back period. So these type of trusts are very helpful when we're trying to help a client. And again, it doesn't work as well if we have somebody coming in who is at the point where they need long-term care. It's helpful if you do it in plenty of time to protect assets. And the nice thing that we're able to do with these is over the years, we can always adjust these trusts as we need to. So if we get to a point where we need to apply for additional veterans benefits or different veterans benefits, you can make changes to the trust that would allow you to then meet whatever qualifications are needed for that particular benefit. So I wanted to make sure to throw this visual on here just so that, we knew what we were talking about when we're dealing with trust. So it's the same idea as when you're doing trust for protection for Medicaid purposes, the same type of trust. We just tweak it a little bit so that it complies with the veteran requirements so that you get those benefits. Our next monthly virtual seminar is at 12/16, and it's at 12, our noontime lunch hour, and it's Don't Be a Scrooge, the ins and outs of gifting. So I know some of the stuff we mentioned here today, we're really going to get in. I'm going to try to do some examples so that we can really dig into the gifting in and out, and we'll touch both what that means for Medicaid as well as what that means for gift tax purposes as well. So you can register by emailing Amy in our office, or you can always call and register. And what we do is once you've registered, then the day of the seminar, we send you a link just for security purposes. So you're always welcome to register that way. You can also do it through our website. And afterwards, we always send a survey just to get your feedback. So to the extent that you're willing to go through the survey, we always appreciate that. So I'm happy to open the floor for questions, but before I do the questions, I wanted to just again take the opportunity to thank all of our veterans for their service. We really do appreciate it. And so thank you for that, and thank you for the sacrifices that you've made. That being said, I'm Samantha from the law offices of Samantha Wolfe, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording so that we can take questions from any of the seminar attendees. So thank you for everyone who was here. I hope you have a great